All right. Hello and welcome to the Debt Rebel podcast. Today, I am very excited to have a former colleague of mine from youth ministry actually join me today on the show, but we are in a different world now today, serving in the financial industry. So today on the show, we have Doug from Thrivent Financial. But Doug, before you started at Thrivent, we used to serve together at some summer camps, and we spent our summers hanging out with middle schoolers and high schoolers, right?
Oh yeah, it was a party.
It was always a blast doing some crazy things, paintballing. Oh my gosh, high ropes courses. Some of those things I opted out of because of my intense fear of heights, but we had a blast. And one of the things that was really fun about serving kids in the communities that we served in is we got an opportunity to talk to them about all types of life, right? And so I would love if you, would introduce yourself on a little bit more about what brought you to that transition from youth ministry to where you are now, but also what is it that you saw in that work that makes you so passionate about what you do now?
Great question. So I'm a financial advisor now with Thrivent. And one of the things that I loved about doing urban youth ministry at Youth for Christ was that we did holistic ministry. You didn't just teach about God and who he is in the Bible, but we also incorporated that into every area of their lives. And so discipleship wasn't just studying the Bible together. It was also kind of helping our kids navigate financial literacy. And as a financial advisor, I still get to do holistic financial planning. And how does that apply to every area of their lives? And so I love that. I love the relational aspect of it. Man, and there's a lot of things that kind of led me to this place. But that was a part of it. That was one of my favorite parts of discipleship, was kind of helping people just navigate financial literacy and grow in those skills. And I also felt like this is one way that I can kind of help narrow the wealth gap and help people kind of climb out of poverty.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about the wealth gap and the poverty mindset?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's a real secret that there is an increasing wealth gap in our country. But what I've found as I've grown in my own financial literacy is that oftentimes people that are in poverty really do have a lot of the same opportunities. They just don't know the secrets of the wealthy. And a lot of those secrets are really available to everybody. There's just things that people that grow up middle class and upper middle class know and are taught. And there's people, and a lot of those same things are just never taught to people that grow up in poverty. And so a lot of it is just that part of it is just equipping people and kind of helping educate people and knowing what are some of those foundational things that they can start with. So
Yeah,
and then
absolutely. Because I think
go for it.
I was going to say one of the things kind of in that education piece too is we kind of rely on too, like our school systems, our public school systems, to teach some of these things. And they have such limited time and capacity to teach those things. I was looking through the curriculum for Washington State, which we both are in, and the requirement, like what's required to be taught at each grade, is such a small amount that there really needs to be more education. And so that from, parents and other outside resources need to be supplemented so that a student can get the education that they need in the financial area, but it doesn't always happen, right?
Yeah. No, my daughter, she attended Stadium High School and she took a financial algebra class, and it was an elective. It wasn't like mandatory. She took it her senior year, and it was a 1-year course on financial literacy that was incredible. I mean, she showed me the material and the syllabus, and I'm like, this is incredible. This is stuff that I learned as a financial advisor, and they're teaching this high schoolers and making it applicable. But it was again, probably 2 to 5% of the school took that class. And it's one of those things that, man, I wish this should be mandatory for every single student in every single school, because it's so good.
Yeah. That's awesome that she got that opportunity to take that and took the opportunity.
Yeah. It was a really great class.
So, Doug, in the work that you were doing at YFC and kind of this transition that you've made to reducing that wealth gap, we talk about poverty mindset and how that can affect how we move forward with our money, how we see our money, those goals that we set, and maybe those times where we're like, you know what, we're always going to be fighting. We're always going to be having less money. We're always going to be living paycheck to paycheck. How do you see that showing up in the work that you do now?
Yeah, yeah, really good question. Um, when I think about a poverty mindset, I kind of define it as like you're living life thinking that you're in a state of deficit all the time. So in other words, you just live believing I don't have enough. And I guess I want to clarify a couple things. One, it's not always a bad thing to live feeling that you don't have enough. When I think about the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit,
Hmm,
that's essentially saying I don't have enough on my own. But the
right.
important part is that I don't have enough because God does. you know,
Yeah,
but when you live
that's
in a
good.
deficit poverty mindset, you're believing I don't have enough, and you're not really living with the second part that God does meet my needs. And I also don't want to minimize like when people legitimately are lacking. If somebody doesn't have food and they're starving, it's okay to say that you're starving. But I would say like the
Yeah.
the problem with a poverty mindset, there's a kind of three main problems. I'd say the first one is just the focus on what you don't have versus what you do have. And there's
Mm,
just a lot of research around just the power of gratitude and what we can overcome, how much more we can do than we think is possible when we're living in a state of gratitude. And then another problem with a poverty mindset is we start to view ourselves from a deficit perspective. And I would say a deficit perspective really undermines who we are in Christ.
mm,
I would consider myself faith forward, meaning my faith is incorporated into everything I do, including my work. And so if I believe that I'm created in the image of God, then through Christ, I also believe that all the blessings in the heavenly realms are for me and I can do immeasurably more than I ever ask or imagine. And so if I believe that, then it's hard to live in a deficit mentality, I guess, if that makes sense. And then the third problem with living with a deficit mentality is just that sometimes there's just certain behaviors that come out of that thought pattern. And those behaviors oftentimes are detrimental financially and just in every area of our lives.
yeah, absolutely. This is the part where I like to really nerd out on is some of that behavior stuff because that really, our minds are very powerful. And especially as some of the listeners of this show that struggle with ADHD, like myself, and how that mindset really does determine a lot of our behaviors. Can you talk a little bit more about the behaviors that you see that align with that poverty mindset?
Yeah, I would say there's kind of two that come to mind. One of them is a scarcity mindset. So when you are afraid that there's not going to be enough for you, you kind of live in a state of
Mm-hmm.
self-protection with walls up. And
Mm-hmm.
when you live in self-protection, you're always just looking out for yourself. So you're not giving to others, you're not helping others, you're not looking out for others. Well, I I believe that we were created to live generously. So we're blessed when we give, we're blessed so that we can give. Well, if you live in a scarcity mindset, you're not going to live generously. Think about it if you have a community that's composed of people who are all living in a scarcity mindset. There's no community at all. And then the second one,
Right.
I don't know what to call this. I've never read a book about this or anything. It's just my own personal observations, but I call them dignity issues. Oftentimes, when people grow up in poverty and they kind of live lacking, they often feel like they lack dignity and they kind of live with a sense of inferiority. And so, what happens is you have to overcompensate to kind of prove that you really do have dignity. So, I would say
Mm,
wearing my financial advisor hat, this is where I see patterns where people, oftentimes those patterns are from people that have grown up in poverty. They'll they'll oftentimes do things and live in such a way that's like way outside of their means because they just kind of want to overcompensate and show either make up for what they didn't have when they were growing up,
yeah.
or they kind of want to prove to others that they've arrived. So some of the ways I've seen that, you'll have somebody that makes 50,000 a year, but they'll have a $40,000 car.
Mm,
Or I remember even like doing youth ministry. I remember one year there was this kid that legitimately, I knew his situation. He legitimately could not afford camp,
mm-hmm.
couldn't afford a deposit even. And then to camp, he brought two suitcases to camp, one for his regular things, and the other one was full of Jordans. He had an entire suitcase of 12
Wow.
pairs of Jordans, each costing about $300. You know, at
Yeah.
camp, we say over and over, do not bring nice things to camp. Only bring things that can get messy, you
Yes.
know? And it's really easy to judge that kid and say, well, how can you afford camp
Hmm.
if you can afford these shoes? And and I don't know how he got the shoes. And honestly, I don't care. The point is,
Right.
he clearly needed people to think that he was not poor, and he really needed to present an image. And when you're secure, you don't need to do that. And so
Yeah.
oftentimes kids, when they grow up and become adults, those patterns you don't just outgrow those patterns. Those patterns follow you. And so oftentimes people that are really struggling with debt, a lot of times it is because they're buying things that they can't afford. And so sometimes the other thing is oftentimes maybe they were without certain like vacations or eating out, things like that when they were growing up. So now when they're adults, it's like, well, I'm going to make sure that I don't go without again. And so they're living in such a way that they can't really afford or is not sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something too, especially for the listeners of our show here, that a lot of us are actively parenting. And I remember before I became a parent, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this, this, and this differently than how I was raised. And
Yeah,
I
all
think
the
this is
time.
one of those things that we can definitely, it's an easy trap to fall into, whatever, however we were raised, because we're like, hey, that I saw how that affected me growing up and I want to do things a little bit differently. But we can get into that trap of, I want to do it differently, but I'm going to do it at all costs for my kids. And we could think it can
So true.
appear as an act of love and, providing for them, but it could be detrimental to our long-term goals. And kind of checking those things for myself has been really, and especially as I teach this, and it's really important for me as a woman of integrity to, practice what I preach, but also seeing how sometimes those things can creep in. And if we don't have some checks and balances on that, then it can get really out of control, where we're racking up, like you said, credit card debt and these buy now, pay laters, because
Hmm.
we just want my daughter's in dance. I want her to have all of the best things so that she can show up as her best self and perform well and be confident. But if I put all of my resources towards that, then that's going to take away from other opportunities that we have. And so I could definitely see that, however we were raised, especially if we're actively parenting, those things can really creep in if we're not mindful of them.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great example about the parenting. I've seen that a lot with like Christmas time. You know, for people that grow
Mm,
up without or they grow up kind of poor and Christmas was kind of a sad memory for them. Oftentimes they overcompensate at Christmas where they have a budget, but when it comes to Christmas, they just go like massively over budget because they equate love with
yeah.
money. And I think that's a deception, is that more money spent does not equal more love. Like that's a deception.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think about, we recently had a death in the family. And one of the things that was really apparent to me was, at the end, it's not about the stuff, it's about the relationships that you have with people. And like, even my daughter now, she's like, I would rather have been able to spend some more time with this person versus having more stuff from them, even though her love language is gifts and she likes
Yeah,
things and that kind of stuff. But she even sees it at 7 years old, like how important a relationship is, and being, like you said, the community part, that's a huge piece. And if we it's easy to get caught up in these things because, one, they're blasted all over, like our social media, TV. I mean, you
totally.
can't go anywhere, you can't drive down the road, you can't do anything without having some sort of advertisement or some, like, this will make your life better type stuff. And so we're constantly trying to reject those things if we're trying to stay focused. I even see it within my own family that, okay, you got to have these checks and balances in place to rein yourself in, to keep your eye on the prize, as we talk about in the membership community mind. We talk about that a lot. Keep your eye on the prize. And for
Hmm.
us, it's been experiences and time together. Do we buy things? Absolutely, right? we have needs and we have wants and stuff, but it's about creating these experiences together, overcoming and thinking through, one, identifying this poverty or scarcity mindset like you and I've been talking about is really important. So how do you advise people and how do you coach people through this when you see these things and they're saying, "Hey, I don't want to stay here. I want to work through this and I want to get on the other side of this." What are some things that you work with your clients on?
Yeah, that's a good question. We usually will start with at Thrivent, we have this picture of a financial house. And just
Hmm.
like building any house, you start with the foundation. And if you skip the foundation, the rest of the house is going to be wonky and
Yeah.
it's never going to work the way it's supposed to, right? And so some of
Yeah.
those foundational things that we start with are having emergency savings, having a control on debt, having proper protections in place, things like that. And so we start there. And so if people have debt and if people have debt and they don't have any emergency savings, that's where we start. Is like, okay, let's get a plan
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
you know, let's start
Hmm.
with a budget. And then from there, after the foundation's in order, then we work with our clients on, okay, now let's start building. And these are the
Yeah.
steps that we need to take to build.
Yeah. I love that. It's kind of like working out, right? You start out and you're like, all right, this is where I am. This is where I want to go. Creating a plan together. And then it's not okay, I just went to one workout, so now my financial plans are all in place and ready to go. It's an ongoing process. And it doesn't necessarily have to take a lot of time. That's one of the things I love teaching too, is that it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but it is important to put some focus into, especially if we don't want to stay where we are currently.
Totally. Yeah, working out, that's a great analogy. My cross country coach in high school would always say it's so much better to run 2 miles 5 days a week than 14 miles in one day, right? But
Yeah.
yet sometimes, like with financial plans, we just want to, you know, do one big thing and then ignore all the little steps. And it's really slow and steady is how we win this race. It's the little
Yeah.
behaviors
Yeah.
consistently over time that's going to win this war.
Yeah. Because if our current situation isn't what we want it to be, and if we're listening to the show, I'm making that assumption, then it didn't happen overnight. So
No, it never
reversing that
does.
and moving forward and making it better is going to it's gonna take a little bit of time. But having the right team and the right people to help guide you through that process. And that's what one of the things that I love about what I do is I love helping set up people so that when they go to meet with financial advisors like yourself, Doug, they're like, this is a dream because we have taken care of, they have their monthly budget in place and they've eliminated their debt and they're like, all right, we're ready to build. And so I think that's really what's a great partnership between myself and you and other financial advisors is it does take a team effort and there's people specialized in
Really
certain
does.
things to help, because I don't advise people on their investments. That is not my thing. I have help for that as well. And so I think staying in our lane and finding the right team and the right people to help guide us through that process is really important.
Yep. Totally agree with that. Yeah. There's some really great programs out there and coaches out there like you that really help people, especially for people coming out of debt, that really
Hmm.
help people kind of get those things in order. And as a financial advisor, if I have people that have worked with someone like you, they're so much more ready to start building the next phase towards their financial plans.
Yeah. Get the windows in, get the walls up, right?
Yep.
So we can get the roof on the thing. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and get the foundation.
One of the things that has come up a lot in the coaching membership that I have is having to dip into savings because life happens instead of putting that emergency on a credit card and stuff. And how, when you have clients that go through that similar thing, I'd just be curious to hear what your feedback is, because sometimes this can be one of those, the poverty mindset can creep back in, especially maybe if we have overcome that in the past and we feel like, hey, we're back here again. But what's your take on that, and what does that look like for you and your clients? So maybe they have that emergency savings set up and life happens and they have to dip into that because they don't have, that's what it's there for. They have to use that. but then have some feelings about it that maybe aren't so positive, and kind of that scarcity or that poverty mindset creeps in that area where, hey, we're back here again, or this is a temporary thing versus a long-term thing. How do you encourage people through that process and remind them that this is the point of the emergency fund, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, again, that is the emergency. It's kind of funny because I think a lot of people in financial industry would like to skip over emergency funds and go right into investing. But the reality is the emergency fund is that safety net that prevents you from doing the things that you don't want to do. So I think about like
Mm,
a trapeze artist. You know,
hmm.
you can have a trapeze artist that's done this 1,000 times, but you're never going to see him do it without a net, right? And so the emergency
Yeah.
fund is our net. And if we don't have that net when something does happen, and in life, if you have a body, a house, or a car, something is going to happen. So if you don't have that emergency fund, you're going to do something that you don't want to do, which is either a credit card or a HELOC or cashing in your retirement plan early,
Mm.
accruing a penalty, all those things. Yeah. So yeah, I can't stress enough the importance of emergency savings. I would say maybe the difference between a temporary deficit and like a long-term scarcity mindset is just math. You know, a temporary is okay, you took a hit in your bank account, the numbers,
Hmm.
it's just a numbers issue. And okay, but there's a plan to get those numbers back up, and it's temporary, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. A scarcity
Yes.
mindset that's long term is a way of living where you feel that you'll never have enough, so why even try? And so
Mm.
there's a hopelessness to it. And when you have that hopelessness, you do destructive behaviors because you're just like, why even try? Because I'm just going to fail. You know, there also can be a live in the now mentality because you're like, well, I'm just going to fail later on, or I'm just going to lose it later on, so might as well have some fun now. So that's the difference, I would say. It's just I mean, honestly, hope.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good, Doug. That is so good. And yes, the emergency fund, that's what it's there for. And I love your if you have a body, a home, or a car. And I would also add kids, because that seems to be that seems to be the reason why we have to dig into ours every once in a while. Um, you know, I talk a lot about on the show, like emergency room visits and that kind of stuff, where you're just like, okay, well, when you have emergency funds, it makes the emergency a little less stressful because you don't have to add the financial element to it. And I think that's I love what you said. You don't want to have to use it, but when you do, then it just makes it a little bit easier for life to deal with it, and then move on. So
Yeah.
I love what you
Yeah,
said
we'd
about that.
we'd all
That's really
rather
good.
spend if you have $2,000, we'd all rather spend that on a vacation than on tires. But
Absolutely.
it,
Absolutely.
but it's a lot better to buy those tires with something that's 0 interest versus 29% interest.
Yes. Yes, amen.
One more thing I guess I would say about a
Yeah.
scarcity mindset is a scarcity
Mhm.
mindset really has nothing to do with math. You know, you can be completely
Mm.
wealthy and still have that mindset and still have the same destructive
Mm.
behaviors and patterns. There was a great ESPN 30 for 30 called Broke that talks about this. Right now the average NFL player makes 3 million a year and is either bankrupt or under financial stress within 2 years of retiring. So the point of that
Wow.
is that that's not a math issue. That poverty mindset is still there. Yeah, the NFL's made great strides in like they have like tons of coaches now around their players
Mhm.
doing financial literacy. So they've made really big strides, but it's still an issue, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you don't grow up with that kind of money, and it's
Totally.
not modeled or taught, and then all of a sudden you have it, and it's just like people that win the lottery, and then, they're bankrupt a couple of years later, or,
Totally.
sometimes not even
Yep.
that long, because they don't either don't have a plan, or, it's really easy for us to spend, $20 a day on nothing, but it's also really easy to spend $20,000 a day on nothing, right? And like you
Yeah.
said, it's not a math problem. Yeah. That's so good. That's so good, Doug. I'm gonna have to check out that documentary. I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh, yeah, it's
I'm a
awesome.
big documentary fan lately. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, Doug, before we sign off, I got two more things for you. One, if people want to get connected to you um, and learn more about Thrivent and potentially working with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, there's two ways. I mean, you can just Google Doug Jonson Thrivent, and my name is spelled Jonson. And Thrivent is spelled Trivent. And or you can email me, doug.jonson@thrivent.com. Those are the two best ways.
Awesome. Cool. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes for anyone
Yeah,
that wants to get
thanks.
in touch with you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you being on the show today. And this was such a good conversation. I feel like you and I could have many more follow-up conversations about this
We
kind of
definitely
stuff
could.
because, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Every time we talk, I'm like, we should have just hit record before we started our conversation.
Yeah, totally.
But today we got the chance to. And so I would love it because you're a guest on the show. And one of the things that I love about this show and having people share their insights is to honor. My dad taught me a lot about finance growing up. And so I would love it if you have a dad joke to send us off.
Oh, yeah, I have lots of dad jokes. All right, so what is green, has warts, and lives alone?
What is green, has warts, and lives alone? I don't know.
Hermit the frog. That's hermit
I
with an
love it,
H.
Doug. Oh, that's a fun. I have not heard that one. So you know what? I am surprised. We never duplicate a joke on this show. So thank you so much, Doug. Thanks for bringing your insight today. Thanks for bringing your wisdom and your humor. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Julianne. This is really fun. Let's do it. Let's
Awesome.
keep having the conversations. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you for tuning in to the Debt Rebel Show today. Ready to take your family budgeting to the next level? Stop that paycheck to paycheck grind and start living debt free? Head over to my website, debtrebelpodcast.com. That's DEBTREBEL podcast.com to grab resources, tools, and tips to make it happen. And don't forget, subscribe, leave a review, and if you know another family that would love hearing today's episode, it would be such a gift for both of us, your friend and me, if you share this episode. And remember, your debt-free life starts with one brave step, and I'm cheering you on every step of the way. We'll talk soon, Debt Rebel.